Hello again, I'm Wendy. Today I'll be showing you how to paint this simple autumn landscape. It's a step-by-step demonstration that's suitable for beginners and for those with a little experience. In my last video I painted a simple autumn tree similar to this one, and I'll put the link to that in the description box below. Today we're going to paint this tree into a landscape, and I'm going to talk about and demonstrate how to paint the distant trees wet into wet. These will be the middle trees that we're looking at now, and then finally we're going to put a foreground in made up of grasses. This is the pencil sketch I work from. I'm sorry it's not that easy to see. I usually just indicate with light pencil marks where the main elements will be. The finished picture is here to help you with the drawing if you're going to have a go at this picture. The middle ground trees are sitting about a third the way up from the base of the picture. And make sure you leave some gaps in the trees so that you can see parts of the field behind. The distant trees are just suggested in pencil. Remember, all the pencil lines will be rubbed out, so use a very soft pencil like a 2B and don't press on very heavily. In fact, usually I wouldn't put any pencil lines at all in where those distant trees are going to be, but I know it can help just to have an indication there. Generally, a landscape painting works well if you have a foreground, a middle ground and a background, with some of these elements overlapping. Also, think about making your colours cooler and not as intense as you go further into the picture. We're talking about aerial perspective here, and it's what gives the illusion of depth, or 3D-ness if you like, to a 2D image. So let's get down to work. I started off by just using a little bit of masking fluid on the fence. I just want to suggest that there's a fence there. I don't want it to be too obvious in the finished painting. And on the whole, I'll be painting background, middle ground and then foreground in that order. I have my colours mixed up ready for the background. I shall be using ultramarine for parts of the sky together with raw sienna, and I've got some runny mixes of those, and then I've got a stiffer mix here of the ultramarine with a touch of light red for the distant trees. I'm just testing out this colour for these distant trees. I don't want it to be too blue, I just wanted it to be a little bit on the red side. So starting to paint the sky, what I did first was I wet the paper, not too wet, but damped it with some clean water before I applied the colours to it. The ultramarine went on first, and then just below that I added some of the raw sienna. You will see also that then I lifted the paper slightly and put it at an angle so that the ultramarine ran down into the raw sienna. You have to be careful when you're doing things like this that you don't get the colours mixing and turning into a green, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. You do see green in skies. They can look really nice, in fact. I just reinforced the blue a little bit at the top of the sky there. I strengthened the raw sienna for the distant field there. And then I brought the raw sienna into the foreground and gradually added some burnt sienna to it as well to bring some warmth into the foreground. Usually when I'm painting I like to cover the whole paper with colour, usually a light wash if I'm not painting that area immediately. I don't like large white areas as it's difficult to judge tones and colours against them. I'm judging that now the background wash is at about the right wetness to apply the ultramarine and the light red mix. If you find it is too wet, then wait a minute or two or strengthen the colour mix. This wet into wet work can prove quite difficult when you're first starting to paint, and it really is only experience and practice that will make you find it easier. I'm deliberately spreading the paint out at the base of the trees and making the top of the trees stronger. Try to think about making a lighter colour in the area where you plan on painting one of the main middle ground trees. So here I'm just practicing some of the mixes for these middle ground trees, and they're mainly made up of raw sienna, burnt sienna, and with some ultramarine to darken the mix. I made sure the background trees were thoroughly dry before using a dry brush stroke for these middle ground trees, in a similar manner to the one described in my earlier video. Try not to get the trees too blocked in. Have some holes for the birds to fly through, and then your viewer will be able to see the background behind, and it will achieve that sense of perspective, that aerial perspective that we're wanting in the picture. I use the darker mixtures quite sparingly, and I use them at the base of the trees to indicate shadows in the foliage. I didn't want to get the tones too dark in this middle ground because I wanted to reserve them for the foreground grasses. Moving on to the foreground, I strengthened the area with a light to mid-tone wet into wet wash using raw sienna and burnt sienna, and I let this wash dry completely. At this stage I like to remove any pencil lines, making sure of course that the painting is really dry. The masking fluid where the fence is can also be removed now, and then with a very small brush I just put a little bit of raw sienna on there just to knock back the white a little bit. And you might want to put a little bit of shadow side on the fence in some areas with a mixture of ultramarine and your burnt sienna. But we don't want the fence to become too prominent to become a main feature of the painting. The next stage is the painting of the branches and the twigs on the trees. I used a rigger brush and a mix of burnt sienna and ultramarine that I kept dark but on the warm side. If you use too much ultramarine in these mixes, then the mixes can go quite black and not look very natural in your painting. You can see now, I think, why I only suggested these trees in my original sketch. The position of the twigs and the branches depends on the dry brush marks I made, and these will be different every time you paint a tree. This is a made-up landscape and I'm very used to painting trees. I think it would help you to use a reference for your painting. Ideally, use a sketch or a photograph of your own. Just use the reference for the main shapes, not for the details. I just felt it needed a little bit of extra foliage here, and again a few practice mixes before I put it on. It's always a good idea to put a mount around your painting at this stage to assess it more easily. It also helped me to position the grasses in the foreground. I had to be very careful not to have them too uniform and too even along the bottom of the picture, as that wouldn't look natural and would form a barrier to the eye going into the landscape beyond. Again, it's a dry brush stroke that I'm using here mainly for the grasses. This time I'm doing upward strokes with the brush, and here I'm using mainly burnt sienna, maybe with a touch of ultramarine. I have made a video about painting grasses like this, and I'll put a link in the description box below for you. There's more ultramarine going into the mix now, as you can see. It's making the grasses darker and bringing them forward in the picture. I was quite happy with that, but I felt it needed a few more individual blades of grass putting in there, which I did with a rigger. A bit of fine-tuning left now. I felt I'd lost the base of those distant trees behind the gap in the hedge. So what I did was I carefully added a little more colour to them, and I was quite satisfied then. I thought it worked better. I also added a tiny bit more foliage around the what might be gate posts there, or the gap in the hedge. And then finally, again, I felt I'd lost that field on the left hand side, so I pulled out some of the colour there, and then I added a little bit of yellow there. Using a tissue to blot out can be quite useful sometimes. So here again is the finished picture, and as always I hope you learned something from the video that will help you in your own paintings. And remember, you can subscribe to my channel so you don't miss anything in the future. Bye for now.